welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers, and rock stars of life. I'm Katie Brewer, and there's so much to say about my guest today that I don't quite know where to start. For a British actor to have been so highly acclaimed, playing the American leads in award-winning blockbusters such as Band of Brothers, Homeland, and Billions, that speaks volumes for an exceptional talent, and that's before we even begin to talk about his roles in top UK series such as Henry VIII in Wolf Hall, Soames Forsyte in the Forsyte Saga, and many, many more. He is a multiple award winner and nominee and has an OBE and CBE for his contributions to drama and charitable works. His latest role is as an MI6 agent in a new miniseries, A Spy Among Friends, which is streaming on ITVX and BritBox. But not only is he one of the most talented actors of our generation, but he's also a presenter, a producer, and an increasingly well-known and highly rated musician. I'm also led to believe that he likes Supertramp, David Bowie, Madness, table tennis, in fact, pretty much all competitive sport, and sticky toffee pudding. I am totally beside myself and extremely grateful to be talking today to Damian Lewis.
Fantastic. Can I borrow that? When people ask me for a bio, you write a bio, Damien. We just need a bio, fill some stuff in. Great, I'm just going to write that. It's fantastic.
You know, sticky toffee pudding is clearly the most important part.
Everyone needs to know that.
So, Damien, you were born in St John's Wood. How would you describe yourself as a child?
The mean streets of St John's Wood.
Mean streets?
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Tough crowd.
How to describe myself as a child? I was quite a shy child until I was about 8, and then I wasn't. And then I was very boisterous and charging around and talking a lot and used to get caned a lot for talking because that's the kind of education I had. I was sent off to boarding school at the age of 8 when they were still caning. They didn't like people talking after lights out in the dormitory, which is when I like to do most of my talking, usually around a slipper fight or a pillow fight or something. But then we were all marched off down to the headmaster's study and, you know.
And do you think that going to boarding school was what made you more boisterous?
I was shy to start with. I was quite quiet, I think. I was quiet up until a certain age and then quite watchful. But I haven't been since, probably. Although I would say often your perception of yourself is very different from what other people see in you. And you always worry a bit about that disconnect. So, well, how can we all feel so differently about me? Then you question your self-knowledge and all those sorts of things. I've had one or two people say they think I'm quite a loner, but that might be residue of that sort of early interior shyness. I don't know. But I think most people who meet me would say that I was not shy any longer.
Well, I don't think you can be shy in your industry. Well, privately you can be, but I think it's...
Discuss.
I mean, absolutely, for discussion.
I think lots of people are quite shy and awkward.
And they mask it.
Awkward in themselves. Well, it's why they're actors. Cloaking yourself in someone else, and you find an energy and a life and a dynamism that you might not have yourself. Yeah, that's the great therapy of acting.
That's true. And you started acting at a very early age. So you were at this boarding school where you were being told off a lot. And you had a less auspicious start because I read that you were in Princess Ida and you completely forgot an entire act in terms of lines. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. And it was a humiliation and very weird that it ever should have happened. It's sort of like a weird sort of nightmare, waking nightmare. But yes.
Do you still have it?
Well, that is an actor's anxiety dream that all actors have, running up to the press night opening of a show. You can't get to the theatre on time, so you're running, and you know you're not going to get to the theatre on time. Or you get lost in the back of the theatre trying to find the stage, all anxiety dreams. Or you just forget every single line that you have. And this just actually happened to me. Yes, I think it was 11. The school I was at had an annual production of A Gilbert and Sullivan, which is quite sort of quaint, old-fashioned thing to do, but they were sort of amazing. Anyway, I was there doing Princess Ida, which no one knows. I mean, it's like... You quite
Oliver.
No, you quite quickly get to the Gilbert and Sullivans that no one's heard of. There are about 3 that everyone has. So if you're doing them every year. Anyway, so I was Yeah, Princess Ida, and I'd been given the lead quite young because I had quite sort of, I sang the solos in the school carol concerts and all that because a little treble, I was a little boy
What's your
treble.
singing, which we need to come back to.
Yes, and we can talk about when my voice broke in the middle of Once in Royal David City when I was 13 in front of the school and all the parents. Anyway, so that was another humiliation. It's amazing I continued. But yes, I stood there in the final act of this play and just realised I hadn't really looked at or learnt the entire final act, and just sort of stood there on stage like a flapping fish, my mouth.
And did they finish the act? Did they sort of close it
No,
off?
we did
or
it,
you just
but Mrs. Woodgate's on the piano finished it for me. She sang it from the side of the stage. And I was like a ventriloquist dummy up on stage, just sort of trying to mouth the words. The headmaster came into the dining room afterwards. He said, in the entire history of the school, that is the worst dress rehearsal we have ever had. And anyway, so I got learning pretty quickly the next day.
And has that happened to you under more serious circumstances?
Yeah, I've dried on stage. They call it drying if you forget lines. Yes, I've dried on stage. In fact, my first show, my most spectacular dry was my first show in London as a professional actor. I'd just been at Birmingham Rep playing Romeo and a production of Rope, the Patrick Hamilton play, which Hitchcock turned into a famous movie with Jimmy Stewart. And I was down at the Almeida Theatre doing School for Wives, which is a Molière play in rhyming couplets. And I had this long speech with Ian McDiarmid. And Ian McDiarmid, for those of you who don't know, was the Emperor in Star Wars.
Oh my goodness! Okay, so I didn't recognise the name.
And wonderful classical actor, and was co-artistic director of the Almeida at the time with Jonathan Kent. And I just got to this point. I was playing a young lover opposite Emma Fielding, and I just dried 3 times in exactly the same spot.
Oh, gosh.
In the week before Christmas, as we were running up to Christmas. And I just remember that I've got about 20 lines now, and I've got no idea what I've got to say. I knew roughly what the story was, which is always a good start as an actor, and proceeded to improvise in my own rhyming couplets for 20 lines. And I thought, if I can just make the end of each line rhyme, I think I'm going to get away with this.
No, because no one really understands what Shakespeare's saying anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And watching Ian McDiarmid's face, who we'd been rained on with real rain in this production. It was quite dramatic. It was a very pretty production, actually. Real rain came down on stage. And because he was so hot in a big overcoat, he literally was steaming in front of me. He's just steam pouring up off his shoulders like something out of Star Wars, and looking quite sort of ghoulish. And his face when he realised each night that I was talking absolute gobbledygook was one of the funniest things I will ever see on stage. And he just doesn't work very well on a podcast, but his sort of face sort of snap shut, and then his whole body sort of convulsed, and face changed, and sort of, oh my God, he's talking absolute nonsense. And realised he had to suddenly switch on.
He then had to follow.
Well, then, of course, and this is the beauty and the trauma of being on stage with your fellow cast members, is you are all there as a team. You are all there to help each other. So he then had the responsibility thinking, oh my God, we might never get out of this. I'm going to have to help him out of this.
Move on to
otherwise
the bits
we'd just be talking crap for the next 20 minutes. So, people always say, how do you learn lines and all that sort of stuff? And, you don't learn lines by rote. It's not like learning French vocab or whatever it happens to be. You have to learn the intention behind the line. Why does your character say something? And once you know what the reason is for him saying it or her saying it, then you've learnt your line properly. And so clearly, as a young actor, what I hadn't done leading up to that speech, I hadn't learnt the intention leading into that speech. So I got there, and if you get a bit nervous, you forget everything. You forget it. So the psychological through line wasn't properly mapped by me. And that's what I tell all young actors. That's the way you learn lines. It's the only way.
But it didn't deter you, anyway, with Princess Ida. And it didn't deter you after your Romeo loss of memory either.
Yeah.
And then after prep school, you go to Eton. I taught there, as I said. So high octane and not for the faint-hearted.
How long did you teach there?
I was there for 2 years full time, and then I got married, and then I did half a year toing and froing from London.
What age group were you teaching?
I was teaching everything, 13 up to 18. It's an amazing school. It's tough as well. And how did that suit your personality at that time?
There are good things and bad things about Eton, about every school, presumably. But Eton is so talked about. It seemed to have given us all our most recent leaders again, which is something that hadn't happened for generations. But suddenly they're all in government again and not maybe representing the school in the best way.
No,
I think most people,
definitely not.
Most people would feel that. A highly, highly competitive place. I would say this to start with, I was good at it. I was just lucky. I was a lucky schoolboy. I had schoolboy attributes that suited a boarding school well. I was sporty. I was in the teams. I was likable enough. There was loads of theatre that I could do. I could do loads of stuff. I was just about smart enough to get by with doing very little work. Almost undid me at the end. But, average sort of smart for that sort of place. And the opportunities were everywhere. And actually, as you got further up the school, everything that you could do outside of the quite rigid schedule of the place, which is quite regimented. Every boarding school is. You've got to get 1,200 kids from A to B to C through the course of a day. And it's really packed. So I think after 4 or 5 years there, I started to find that a bit wearing. My memory of Eton was really trying to elasticize the whole system in my favour. So I developed little relationships with the school matron, the house matron, other people, anyone who could give me a chip or a slip or something to excuse me from something in order to... I used to create guitar lessons that didn't exist so I could sort of be late getting into Spanish or whatever it happened to be. It was all
Well,
about
that's quite clever.
I was just trying to create space. There wasn't much space. And that's why a lot of people from Eton retain very close friendships, because those friendships are forged in the fire, if you like, of a highly competitive, close environment. And there's no getting away. You're surrounded by those kids all the time, and the people in your boarding house, just the 10 kids in your year, all the time. And so you leave Eton with a precocious ability to handle yourself in a group. And every single 17, 18-year-old boy that comes out of Eton, you could drop them in a room and they will make conversation, engage with anyone of or any age, from any background, in the most precocious way, in the most elegant, charming way. It's kind of amazing. Whether that's the most important thing to have in life, I don't know, but it's quite winning.
It is.
And people respond to that. So I think there's that. I think for me, overall, I wouldn't say I loved it, but I did it, and it was fine. But I think that need to keep moving, keep dancing so you didn't get caught out in some way is quite prevalent. Don't let the pack descend on you because they sense a weakness. Happen wherever you are at that age. There's no let up if you're at a boarding school. You're there. You got to handle yourself. But yeah, I mean, the opportunities to do things, walking down the high street, to a lovely old master, was sort of a master from, I suppose, a slightly bygone era, lovely man called Dick Haddon, who was, a notorious boozer. We used to go down there on a Thursday evening, sit in his house and read a play every Thursday. It was the play reading club, to get together, and people that you ordinarily might not have spent time with during your time there. It was a complete cross-section of the school of about 8 or 9 of us, scholars, creatives. Stop off down the high street, get 2 massive, great big bottles of cider, get quietly sloshed with Dick Haddon, this lovely old master who loved literature and loved theatre. And we just sit and read plays, and it sounds sort of Victorian, doesn't it?
It sounds
in a
really
lovely
wonderful.
Way. But somewhere like Eton allows for little eccentricities like that.
Yes.
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 That's what it allows for, and that's what makes it sort of rare.
Yes, those are the absolute upsides. And a dear friend of mine, Peter Broad,
Yeah.
I think he interviewed you recently, actually.
Yeah.
His very first play that he directed, you were in it, and it was
Nicholas
Nickleby.
Nickleby, yeah.
And you were some quite weird people, but Wackford Squeers
Yeah.
and Mulberry Hawk. So
Yeah.
you were a one-eyed schoolmaster and a rapist.
Yes.
And he said Damian was terrific. So that was his comment.
How lovely.
But you do get teachers. I mean, I think he'd give Mr. Chips a run for his money because he cared so deeply.
No, Peter was lovely. And he'd been a Dalek on Doctor Who. So when he arrived, it was like our new drama teacher had been a Dalek on Doctor Who.
You know.
That was really cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Maybe been a cyborg. He can't have been a Dalek because he'd have been hidden in all that cardboard plastic. I think he was a cyborg. That was cool to us. Yeah, Nicholas Nickleby was, brilliant, ambitious. Rory Stewart was in it. Rory Stewart was...
Was he?
Yeah, played Smike brilliantly.
Oh, yeah.
Who was Nicholas Nickleby's sort of friend, sidekick. Yeah.
And what point did you think, I'd like this to be more than a hobby?
When I was 16. So I acted all from the age of 8. I acted. My first Gilbert and Sullivan, going all the way back, was me as a policeman holding a truncheon as an 8-year-old. So all the first years, 8-year-olds had police helmets on and truncheons, and we just sat at the front of the stage just like that. Try not to fidget. So I always did it. 16, a group of us put on our own play independently of the school. This is another great... One of the really positive points about Eton is how it encourages independent sort of endeavour, whatever it is, independent projects. They said, sure, you can put on a play, sure, you can have the studio theatre, which was called the Catcher Centre.
Yes, I remember the Catcher Centre.
You're going to have to rent it from us. I went, oh, okay, so you're going to have to go and raise money in order to produce your show. I went, oh. So at the age of 16, we had to, run around, work out how to get enough money in order to rent the theatre for 3 months, 3 nights, 3 months, Christ. That would be great. 3 nights and school uniform, school costumes and the production and lighting and all that stuff. And it was actually putting on a play for the first time, The Long, the Short and the Tall by Clifford Hall. Fantastic play set in the Second World War. And I loved it. I was never happier at school than when I was doing that, actually, and being in plays.
Then you go to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and you're alongside the likes of Daniel Craig, Joseph Fiennes, Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
And I had an interview with an actress, Ingrid Oliver, and she's also a comedian. She had her own comedy show, and she told me about her drama school experience. Well, 2 things that happened. One was there was an animal lesson class where you had to pretend to be an animal in a leotard for sort of weeks on end. And I think she chose to be a panda, but she said, but by the end of that, she said, you really have no shame. It's, that's you can do anything. Then the other thing that she told me was that fortunately for her, the other group, when they were doing their showcase, the director suddenly decided at the last minute they all had to do the play naked, which was, a surprise for all of them. So what was the worst they asked of you?
We also had to be animals.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Which
one were you?
Which was actually great. So our very first term at school, they sent us to London Zoo every weekend and said, you've got to go and study an animal. And then at the end, we create a zoo in our drama school. And you will all inhabit your space for an hour while people walk around the different enclosures as if they're at the zoo, seeing the different animals in the zoo. And I said, oh, great, I want to be an ape. And they said, no, you're too like an ape already. So you can't be an ape. You've got to be something that's very still. So we want you to be a lizard. So I went and studied Lord Derby's Zonia Egyptian lizard for 12 weeks with my friend Oscar, who was also a bit
Was
of an
he
ape.
also a lizard?
Yeah, and also very like an ape. So, and it was one of my best mates and best primates, Badooch. And he, so when it came to the show, studying a lizard turned out to be actually remarkably easy because they don't move. They don't move for hours. And then every now and then they just stick their tongue out to go, and that's it. And then they might go, a turn of the head, a flick of the tongue. So I just lay on top of Oscar for an hour at this viewing. And every now and again we would just turn our head, stick our tongue out, and then maybe just do one little sort of move of the left hand or the right hand. And that was it. But that's what lizards do. They lie around in the sun. So we did that in our leotards.
And then when you leave, you're going down the road of being a theatre actor where you start. What made you change your mind and look to the screen?
I think curiosity and probably ambition as well. Just that I only ever wanted to do theatre, but because it's all I ever really knew. My family, I was very much brought up going to the theatre, not to movies. It wasn't like my parents were great cineasts and said, you've got to watch this film, and this film. But we always went to the theatre. And so my first magical moments in a theatre were sitting there as a young boy when there's the hubbub in the theatre and then the lights go down and it just goes quiet. And those brief few seconds before the lights then come back up on stage. And it was always just really, really exciting to me. And I loved being on stage. I enjoyed it. I felt very natural on stage. And I still do. It's the perfect synergy between sort of athletics, movement, and imagined world and intellect. So that's why I love being on stage. Those three things have to be firing all the time with a hyper awareness, technical hyper awareness constantly of keeping the three cogs going simultaneously. And I love the dexterity that's required of an actor on stage to do that. Be aware of the audience, your cast members, where you are in the story, all of it. So you're sort of guiding yourself through it, but at the same time, looking to immerse yourself totally in an alternative reality, in a different landscape, which is therapeutic in itself, is great. But I think after a while, I think it was probably just seeing one or two of my contemporaries making big movies and just thinking, I didn't know we could do that. Oh, it was sort of, I felt like maybe needed permission for it. I just wanted to go into the West End and be at the National and the Royal Shakespeare Company and just...
Which is what you were doing.
Which I was doing and hopefully will continue to do it. It was 4 years ago now since I was on stage, but, that's COVID plays a part in that. But there was a period of time which was far too long that I wasn't on stage, where I just... I suppose you get taken off along different paths, don't you? And you explore them for a bit, and then you realise, God, I'm deep in the woods here, and I actually had no intention of being here, but here I am. So let me sort of thrash my way out, back to be something I recognise a bit more or want a bit more. So I think that was it. Curiosity, and then it became incredibly important to me that I would be considered a film actor. And it was really, I've done a few small things like, Touch of Frost and Poirot and, the kind of staples, episodic staples for young actors to sort of cut their teeth on. But it was Warriors, which was actually won the BAFTA, which was all about United Nations, UN peacekeeping forces out in Bosnia, which Peter Kosminski directed. And I so desperately...
He did Wolf Hall later, didn't he?
Yeah, he did that later. And I so desperately wanted to be in this. There's an interesting thing that happens. It happens everywhere, actually, but it makes your profession feel very small often, is that when I was coming up in the 90s, you very quickly got pigeonholed as either a theatre actor or a telly and film actor. You got compartmentalised quite quickly, and it's odd that. I think maybe that happens less now because there's so much TV content available to youngsters coming out of drama school now that it's not out of the ordinary that you would land a Netflix series or an Amazon series or whatever, because there are so many of them, so there are opportunities. But to land something like that, in the mid-90s was just like, oh my God. It's like when Ewan, who was a year or two above me at drama school,
Okay.
I remember just saying to Ewan, he said, I don't really want to do theatre. I just want to be a film star. And I worked with him a couple of years ago. I said, how did that turn out for you? But amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
And he made Train Spotting. It was like, how did you get into Train Spotting? I was just thinking about sort of doing my next theatre job. So it was a real eye-opener to see that you could do those things. And then Peter cast me in Warriors. And that was the first major sort of serious bit of TV sort of camera work I'd done, really. And it was a big thing.
Acting for the theatre when you're projecting your voice for the back row, and then versus a camera where you're kind of right here.
Yeah.
It's very different, isn't it? Because you have to, I would imagine, be bigger on stage than you are on screen.
That's right. They are different techniques. I was very wary of the camera to start with. It seemed intrusive. It seemed in the way. I didn't know where to look. Why is it so close? Why is the camera sort of here amongst the 3 or 4 actors? Why is it sort of become a 5th person here in the scene with us? All those things were very confusing to start with. And you just learn quickly on the job till I got to a point where I learned to love it, treat it as I don't know, this could go straight into Sood's corner, couldn't it? But you sort of treat it as a dance partner within a scene, especially when it's moving. If you've got a camera operator and it's on the shoulder, you're doing handheld, it does become a sort of dance partner with you.
There are so many questions I could ask. Can we first just dip into your 3 major roles? Band of Brothers, created by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. You were cast in the leading role of Major Dick Winters. How were you cast in that role?
Well, that was a total needle in a haystack piece of casting. They were going to film a lot of it here. Gordon Brown, I think, actually, it was, who had just introduced, there were lots of favourable tax breaks for filming over in the UK. So they knew they needed to use a lot of English crew and a lot of English actors in order to satisfy the tax break, the relief.
Oh,
so you have to use local talent. So they came over to audition a whole bunch of us young, likely lads trying to, thrusting young actors trying to make our way.
And at that time,
in the profession.
So how many auditions would you be doing in a week?
There were hundreds of actors interviewed here, Australia, America, New York and LA, Australia, the English people. It was the big thing. HBO with Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks were making a massive, great big TV series about the Second World War.
Yeah.
And it was like every young actor on the planet was interviewed for it. And I started off with everyone else with half a page of dialogue, did a script, that none of us what it was, what it belonged to, because it was all top secret. And I just went to a damp basement in Soho one afternoon, read it, and then got called back a few weeks later to go and read something else. And this just it went on for about 3 or 4 months. It went on for a long time. This diminutive Prada-coated producer from LA called Tony Toe would come in, he's a lovely guy, and he would fly in and do all the interviews with us and sit there sort of dripping in designer labels. And it just kept going on a thing till finally they said, we want you to read for the lead role. That was a development, and it was huge. And he came, did the final interview here, and they didn't know who I was. They didn't know me from Adam. It turned out that both Tom and Stephen had been to see Rafe's Hamlet, which we had done on Broadway in 95.
And you were Laertes.
Yeah, I was Laertes, but they didn't know that I was in it. They didn't remember me from that. Some journalists sort of joined the two together and said he was cast because they had no idea that I'd been Laertes. Anyway, I did the final audition and then had a very Hollywood moment where Tony Toe came in and I was on my motorbike. That's right. And we had a motorbike. So I used to go everywhere on my motorbike at the time. And he said, so Damian, how do you like to fly to LA and meet Stephen and Tom?
Wow.
He literally stopped, and I was still a young actor. Nothing like that had happened to me before. I made some terrible joke about how it might hurt my arms if I flew all the way to LA in a sort of nervous, sort of giggly way. And then I was in LA. He went to the assistant, said, call the office in LA, book a flight. Damian, have you got your passport? Yes.
Oh my
And it all
gosh.
went very LA and very Hollywood, which made me giggle. I was in LA then in a week or two later, and I was sat in front of Stephen and Tom, and they asked me to do it.
So meeting Stephen and Tom, who are the kind of golden ones of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And for someone who gets nervous, I get sort of besieged with nerves and doubts and all the rest of it. How did you feel when you met them?
I was definitely nervous. Tom was in the middle of doing Castaway, the film where he's
Yes, I know. And he's then talks
on
to
a
beach
desert
ball
island
for a
on
while.
his own. That's right. So he had this enormous beard. So we all went into some casting suites in Santa Monica, that really horrible bit of Santa Monica. It's all just white block buildings. And we went there, and Ron Livingston was there, who they were hoping to cast as Lewis Nixon, who was in the show is Dick Winters' best pal. And Tom was there, and a whole load of other actors. And people rotated in and out. Myself and Ron and Tom just read all the scenes. Tom did all the different parts, all the accents. Absolutely lovely, just very playful, childlike. Just another actor just in the room. No airs and graces. Then Ron and I did a bunch of scenes together, make sure, I suppose, whether we had, chemistry or not. And I went out that night. It was a really fun day. And I went out that night and got absolutely bladdered with a pal.
You didn't know at that point?
No, just went out with a pal of mine saying, this is so much fun. They put me in a really nice hotel called Shutters on the Beach.
I know.
Down
Well,
in
I haven't stayed there, but I walked past it.
I'm sure you've stayed there,
I have not stayed there.
Because it's not 5-star, that's why.
But I walked past it the other day, I have to say, and it's Shutters.
Yeah, so it's very, very
It's lovely.
And I thought, well, God, they're spending all this money on me. They must be keen.
Yeah.
Something must be right here. Anyway, and then, so I went out, I got trashed. I got in about 3:00 in the morning thinking, well, that's it. They'll let me know. And I got a call really early, about 7:30, 8:00 in the morning from Meg Lieberman, the casting director, who just said, morning, Damian, how are you? And he said, Stephen would like to see you at 10 o'clock. I went, what? Stephen who? Steven's Spielberg. He wants to meet you. It went really well yesterday with Tom. I was in pieces. I mainlined coffee, had a shower, and then just shook and sweated my way into this meeting with Stephen, who then, but as I got there, there was a young actor, really good-looking, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, all-American boy. Turned out he was Canadian, actually. But sitting outside, I thought, fuck me, he looks exactly like Dick Winters.
So by then you knew what the plot and who Dick Winters was.
I was there. I was there for the main role. I knew. This was the guy that everyone had been talking about for months in LA, New York, London, everywhere.
Okay.
Everyone had started reading the book by now. And I was like, oh my God, he's the main part of this new $120 million, which is the most expensive TV show made at the time.
Yes.
And I got there and I saw this guy who looked exactly like Dick Winters. I went, oh God, well, that's a long way to come, isn't it? Anyway, so he goes in and he comes out and he's got a really lovely open smile and he says, good luck, man. And it was, he said it in a way like,
it's yours.
Yeah. I never saw him again. He's someone I so want to meet, actually.
Yeah.
I feel like we should get on the radio too. When you get a chance to say thank you to someone that you've never had a chance to say thank you to.
Yes.
Like the male nurse I want to say thank you to after my motorbike accident, who put me in the recovery position. And anyway, that's a whole other story, but I want to say thank you.
When was that?
To him. When I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company, that was 98. A year before this, about a year and a half before this. Anyway, so I then go in, I meet Stephen and Tom. Stephen is there, he spends his whole time behind a VHS camcorder, just videoing the whole thing. And then he leaves after about...
And are you doing lines then now?
We're just talking. He says, just talk, I'm going to video the whole thing.
Okay.
Just talk. Just be in the room. We're going to ask you questions. Just chat. And I said, okay. And I said, in an American accent, I said, okay. And then he said, right, I'm going to go. I've got to watch my kid play soccer. And I went, okay. So he took off to play soccer. And then Tom said, Then I was left with Tom going, Stephen loves soccer. And his boy's really good at soccer, so he always watches all the soccer games. And we had to talk about Stephen loving soccer. And I was like, Tom. And he said, thanks for coming, dude. Great. Thanks for flying all the way out here. Boom. Out you went. And
We still didn't know.
And no. And then Tony, I think the producer, if I remember rightly, he came in and they said, so boot camp starts in April.
That was it. That was the moment that you knew.
That was it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a good story. I haven't told that story for a long time.
It's a great story.
Young, Brit actor out and sort of having, it was definitely a little Hollywood moment. It was lovely. It's great.
And was there ever such a transformational moment again in your career? I mean, that was just monumental.
Yeah, Band of Brothers just became a thing. It just became one of those enduring, loved, really admired because it was done brilliantly.
Yeah,
I was very lucky.
I've just watched it actually.
Yeah.
So
have you?
And it's yes.
And you like? You think? I mean, and
it's extraordinary.
And it doesn't feel dated.
Not at all. It was
done beautifully, sincerely. It's a brilliant piece of work, and I was very, very, very lucky to be at the centre of it.
And I would imagine a huge responsibility for you as well, because correct me if I'm wrong, but much easier to create a character than to emulate someone who's still living, and then you've got to be true to the story and to him.
Yes, that's right. Actually, Tom gave a very good speech as we started our 2 weeks training at boot camp, which was intensive but great. And he just said, think of this as a historical document. We need to honor these people, the memories of these men, and the extraordinary things they did. And that, it certainly makes you stand an inch taller. And you just think, oh, right, okay, let's not muck about, let's get this right.
And did you meet the real Dick Winters?
Yeah, I went and stayed with him in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Dick was interesting because, because he was ancient. He was 26 years old when they dropped in to Normandy on June 1944. And, a lot of those boys were all 18, 19 years old. He was relatively, a veteran of 26. He'd already been to university. He'd studied agricultural economics. And then he came out of, after he stopped serving at the end of the war, he went and worked in Lewis Nixon Nitration Works, which was his best pal's family company. Lewis Nixon, bit of an alcoholic, Yale educated, moneyed, very different from Dick Winters, but they became best pals. And he went and worked there, met his wife, Ethel, who worked there, and then he left and he developed a recipe for chicken feed, which made him a millionaire.
Oh my goodness.
And he sold it into the market, to the agricultural market. And he had a lovely house in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where the chocolate comes from.
Yes.
Cookie cutter, idyllic looking American farmhouse with white picket fences, right? And barns and this, that, and the other. And I went and visited him.
Was he happy to chat?
Well, this is why the very end of the series, if anyone hasn't seen it, there is arguably the most moving part of the entire 10 hours. At the end of every episode, they cut to one of the veterans who just are talking about their memories. Dick only ever spoke to me really about maneuvers. He spoke to me about technical things, about soldiering, and the right thing to do as a soldier. Good decisions that were made, bad decisions that were made. He wasn't given to, long, teary storytelling in the bar at 3 a.m. drinking whiskey. Bill Gunnier, Babe Heffron, they did that. They were great, great characters. He had something of the officer class about him. He was more restrained, more cut off. So the moment at the end of episode 10 of Band of Brothers, when he's receiving a letter from Ranieri's grandson, who writes his grandfather a letter, he says, Grandpa, were you a hero in the war? And the grandpa replies, no, but I served in a company of heroes. And when Dick Winters recounts this, his lip goes and he's holding on and his voice quivers and he is holding on, trying not to cry. And it is the single most... I defy anyone not to go at that point, because this is a man who is so controlled.
Kept it together.
Which is why he was such a good leader, such a good commander, why his men loved him so much, because they trusted him with the right decisions.
What happened to you after that was because it must have been so instant fame, which has pros and cons to it.
You know, you'll find lots of famous people have said this 100 times before me. You can't switch it off. That's the thing. So when it's good, it's good. You know, and you walk into some nice restaurant and goes, Mr. Lewis, how nice to see you. So I'm sorry I don't have a reservation. So don't worry, sir, we will find you a little table. You know, all that stuff. Who wouldn't love that? That's fantastic. But when you're crossing the road and you've got 7 Sainsbury's bags in your hand and you've got 2 small children and you're trying not get run over across the road and someone just comes up and sort of grabs you by the arm and goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, is it you? Is it you? I can't believe it. I can have a picture. And you're like, oh my, I really need to just get across the road. And I need to not, I need to take my 2 children with me. They mustn't die in this exercise. And I've got a lot of shopping, you know, so, and then you've just got to be generous. You've got to be as generous as you can be, because it is very weird for people to see someone like, you know, imagine if it's someone, you know, imagine if it's Brad Pitt carrying 7 Sainsbury's bags across. I mean, you know, you have to realize we all live very different lives. You know, we're a little bit used to seeing famous people. We're a little bit used to walking into rooms and maybe seeing an MP or a member of government or someone who's a great conductor or whoever it is. You know, we just get a little bit used to that. You get invited to nice things. There are interesting people there. You know, the vast majority of people have no experience of that. And if they bump into one of us,
it's massive.
You just have to remind yourself that it's a huge moment.
It's a huge moment for them.
And that's not to sort of self-aggrandize.
No. It's just what it is.
My own position. It's just the fact of that moment. And if they lose their senses, behave like a maniacal banshee, and where there's conflict is if you're stuck in your head thinking about something. I mean, as an actor, you can be walking along learning your lines.
Yeah.
You could be, you know, as any human being, you could just be replaying the argument you just had with your wife or your girlfriend. You know, you could be deep into something. You could be really sad about something. You know, and suddenly you can feel a bit like an attack.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Who are you? And what? You know, so.
And then, of course, if you're nice, they might want to stay and talk even longer. So at some point, you have to cut it.
I think I'm quite good at being nice, but clear.
Right. I mean, you have to be. Otherwise, you'd end up never getting into your house.
And the short answer to your question is, overall, it's better. It's a good thing. It's a fun thing. It does add to life in a cool and interesting way. Places I've been invited, people I've met, presidents, prime ministers, interesting, creative, artistic, smart, talented people. Yeah, it's a good thing. I stood with an actor once in a bar. I'll tell you this. I won't tell you his name. He'd done a TV show which was particularly big at the time. And someone came up to us and we were just having a pint in a pub and came up and said, ignored me, which was insulting, frankly, and went straight to him and just...
It was a mistake, wasn't it? Because I bet he's going to do something horrible to him.
No, and he said, can I have a picture of me? I love you. And he turns his back and he said, I'm sorry, does it look like I'm working? And I thought, you've got that wrong, mate.
Yeah.
I think you've got that wrong.
Yes.
I understand it.
Yes, of course.
Because it is work. You've got to turn around, break your conversation, have a picture with someone. That wouldn't have been your first choice of thing to be doing right now. But I think you've made a mistake. I think you've got that wrong. And I remember thinking that at the time and thinking, don't do that.
Lesson to self.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
It's not the right way to deal with it.
Okay, Homeland. Because that was the first thing that I saw you in. And I have to say, I think I kind of stayed in my living room in front of my television for pretty much until I had finished it. You're Nicholas Brody, ex-prisoner of war, ex-US Marine. Did that come to you or did you go to it?
It came to me. what happened was that they were struggling to cast this role. It was a problematic role for them anyway, because they didn't know how long they could make him last, because they knew they had this unrealistic element to the relationship, was that he would get into a relationship with Carrie Matheson, the CIA officer,
Yes.
which was a stretch. It was just a wonderful bit of, if we can pull this off, it will be so entertaining. But we know it's not realistic that the CIA officer would have an affair with the potential terrorist she's investigating. So there were lots of ifs and buts about that role. They couldn't cast it. I think they spoke to lots of different people. They very nearly cast lots of different people. I think there were people who really didn't want me to be it in the process. And then I think what happened was a guy called Michael Cuesta, who is a talented independent film director who I like and who directed our pilot, actually. He had seen a film I'd made called Keen, made by Lodge Kerrigan, which is a piece of work I'm very proud of, very small independent film. And he was a huge fan of it. And he sent it to Alex Ganser, who is the creator of the show, and Howard Gordon, creator of the show, and said, you must watch this. If you're thinking about Damian Lewis, you must watch this. And they watched it. And the story goes, it was a Netflix show when Netflix was still sending out DVDs. Netflix would send you the DVD and then you had to send it back. But some of Netflix films were already just immediately streamable on their website, but not all of them. So Alex Ganser said it was late one night. He went to Netflix and he looked for the film and it was streamable. He said, if I'd had to send out for the DVD and ask for it to be sent to me, I don't think I'd have bothered. I think I'd have just gone, oh, it's too late, I'm going home. And that would have been the end of it. But he said, because I could stream it, I clicked play and I sat, I'll just watch 5 minutes of this. And he said, I sat and I watched the entire movie late into the night. And then I called Fox the next day and said, we've got our guy. So it was thanks to that film and thanks to Michael Cuesta recommending it that I got it. I got lucky. They asked me to do it. And it was a great experience. Yeah. And then talking about, fame, actually, yes, Banner Brothers made me well known, but Homeland, the fame was particularly aggressive. Then people really sort of manhandling you in the street, grabbing you by the arm and really? Yeah, it had a particular kind of success, Homeland.
Yes, I can imagine that. Everyone was talking about it. What's going to happen to Brody? Is he going to turn? Is he not? I can absolutely see that. That was a level again in terms of being well known.
Yeah.
And then you go on to Billions, which is another one. And you are Bobby Axlerod. Again, totally different. I mean, all these roles are so different.
Yeah.
Very different career from your own. Listening to Andrew Sorkin, he said that he wanted it to be as technical and have all the details of hedge fundy stuff. How did you build that character?
Well, the way I do everything, actually, which is quite conventional, but hopefully thorough. I just go to lots of different material sources. I read books in and around the subject. I read Andrew's book, Too Big to Fail, which is all about the credit crunch crisis and the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And I went and interviewed people, or rather, I suppose I did interview them, sat down with big hedge fund guys, Bill Ackman, Dan Loeb, the big US guys, Larry Robbins, all very different. Some of them peacocky, some of them not. Some of them just, tracky bums and hoodies, billionaires. I suppose Bobby sits somewhere between the two, he probably does have a $2,000 haircut, if there is such a thing, but just wears hoodies and jeans. But you can be sure, it's a nice cashmere hoodie and a, $600 pair of jeans. So, but no, $5,000 suits. So went and talked to those guys, watched film, documentaries, etc., etc. That's how I do it. That's how I immerse myself. And that's what I do each time. Some people use music. I don't use music when I'm acting. It's interesting. I don't use it for state or mood prior to going on stage. I prefer silence, and I prefer just thinking my way into the world that I'm going into and just having moments of quiet. Acting on camera is a bit different. There's a lot of kerfuffle and energy and people needing pieces of you before you even start filming. Makeup want to make up your face, costume want to check your costume, sound want to come and stick a wire. up your bum and, just radio mic you and this, that, and the other. And so there's a lot. It's very difficult to create space for yourself just to be quiet before you walk on a film set.
Which presumably is very important because suddenly you have to be Bobby Axlerod or whoever, shutting out all the noise.
That's right. It's you and me in a scene sitting here across my kitchen table, and there'll be 40 people there and cables that you can't see that we don't trip over.
And movement.
And this and yeah. But, we were joking earlier about animals. I use animals. They are central to what I do when I'm finding character. And I used animals for Bobby and just, knew that he was a big cat and he was a predator. And because he was essentially dishonest, play on words, I chose the cheetah, prowling, absolutely
was kind of endlessly
devastatingly quick to pounce. And I think there's a cheetah in there, and then you've just got to make it not like your drama school zoo show.
Okay. Now, your latest thing is A Spy Among Friends.
Yeah.
Based on the book by Ben McIntyre and produced by Alex Carey. And for listeners, it's a story about Kim Philby, the most notorious spy who managed to dupe his friends and betray his country. And you play Nicholas Elliott, his close friend, who tries to extract a confession from him. Well, my first question is, where is it? Because I can't find it. And I'm on so many streaming platforms now to try and get it.
Well, it's not anywhere yet. You haven't missed it. ITV are launching a new streaming platform. Quick plug for ITV because
ITVX.
ITVX is being launched, and Spy Among Friends is the first bit of programming that they are putting out. So we're, in effect, launching ITVX with A Spy Among Friends, December the 8th, very soon. And anyone who wants to watch it can watch ITVX, which I think I'm right in saying just replaces ITV Hub app. And then the special thing about this streaming platform is you can get it for free if you're prepared to have all the ad breaks. But if you don't want the ad breaks, you can pay whatever it is a month, $5.99 or something, and get your premium service and watch it without ads. And you can drop it all at once and binge on it all at once, and it's 6 hours. And you're right, it is about Kim Philby and Nicholas Elliott. Nicholas Elliott was his best friend at MI6, who was largely responsible, I think, for allowing Kim Philby to continue his 25, 30 years of treachery simply because he adored him. And whenever there was suspicion cast over Philby, it was more often than not, Nicholas Elliott said, "Don't be so ridiculous. Kim is this, that, and the other," which placed Elliott under suspicion himself through the debriefings after Philby was not brought back from Beirut, which was Elliott's task. Elliott was sent out to Beirut, and they had this famous, notorious 4 days of interrogation, friend to friend, where he said, "I now know that you have been spying for the Russians and are a KGB agent and have been doing that for 25 years since I knew you in 1939, where we met, 1939, 1940. And it's devastating to Elliott, that betrayal. And at the end of this 4 days, Philby gets on a boat and goes to Moscow, where he lives out the rest of his life as essentially a sort of drunk, a sad, depressed, uninspired alcoholic. And the big question is, did Elliott let him go? Did Elliott choose friendship over country? Did Philby escape? Who hoodwinked who? And Elliott comes back to face the interrogation of his own intelligence agencies, MI5 in particular, because there was this great rivalry between MI5 and MI6, a bit like the rivalry between CIA and FBI.
Yes.
And we show all of that in the show in a fun way, in the TV series in a fun way. But so Elliott is the best friend. The series is really shot through his POV. Elliott is all of us that were duped, have been betrayed, are betrayed by
your best
Philby,
friend,
or by your best friend, or a lover, or whatever it is. So we hope that the show works on a sort of, I suppose, a more emotional, intimate, personal level than just a
A
run-of-the-mill
spy
show.
thing.
That's what we hope.
Music, very important before you go. And I heard on Desert Island Disc that you wanted to be Elvis when you were very little.
Yeah.
And then when you left school, you were traveling on your motorbike and with a tent, and you were busking around Spain and France. And you've been playing all this time. But what has brought you back to doing it professionally?
Well, it goes quite far back. I actually was going to do a West End musical 7-8 years ago, and it had a jazz standard in it. And the producer suggested I went on Joe Stilgoe's jazz show on Radio 2. So when are you going to sing this song? I'm being good and promote the show a bit. And I thought, Christ, I'm going to sing on a jazz show. This is, like you said to me earlier, I like singing in the shower. But anyway, so I show up, and of course, Tim Minchin is there sitting behind his piano, and Keris Matthews is there. And I'm thinking, oh, Christ. People who do this for a living. But I did it. And there's a very nice man in the audience who turns out to be Keris's husband, called Steve. And Steve says, you can do this a bit, can't you? And I said, well, yeah, I always fancy myself a bit as Elvis in the shower. And then he says, well, why don't we record a couple of things? So we did. We recorded a couple of things, bluesy type, sort of standardy, sort of swing jazz type things. And they weren't that great. And we all sort of forgot about it. And then it was like 5, 6, 7 years later, we're all sitting around at home during COVID. I'm on the guitar, just noodling around. And I called him. I said, here we all are sitting around doing nothing. What are we all going to do when we come out of this? And should we get back together? And he said, that's so weird. I have just been talking about you to a couple of record label friends of mine yesterday, having not mentioned you for ever. So I thought, oh, that's weird. And he said, right, I'm going to introduce you to who I think is one of the best young jazz musicians in the country at the moment. And he's called Giacomo. And he put me together with Giacomo. And I sat down with Giacomo about 2 years ago. And from that point till this point, we have been talking, playing music together. He introduced me to a whole bunch of brilliant jazz musicians, but jazz musicians who can play everything and enjoy playing what we're playing, which is a sort of hybrid. They're my songs. I've written an album, and it's...
Is that Mission Creep?
It is called Mission Creep, and won't be out until next spring, but we'll drop singles early next year, probably drop 3 or 4 singles, starting from February probably, or January. And yeah, it's a sort of, I write them on my guitar and I write them at the piano a bit, really average piano player, and guitarist for that matter.
One thing is being musical and playing, but then writing is a totally different discipline.
Yeah, that is totally new. I'll say that. Everyone's probably sat down and tried to write a song. I think I tried to write a few songs in my 20s and just thought, those are terrible. And I must never play those to anyone. So, and then life, I was married to Helen, and Helen and I were very much, I suppose, an acting couple. We didn't try to be that. We just were.
Yes.
And we loved acting, and Helen loved acting and the theatre world, as do I. And we just, music became, I think I went further and further away from it, I think, whilst always just having guitars in the house and picking them up, playing songs to people when they don't want you to,
Yeah. That's what I'm
oh God, he's picked up his guitar, but all the busking was gone, that was in the past. And then I think the truth of it is, it was that, sitting around in COVID and just thinking, as we all did, sat around, you've ended up doing a podcast.
Yes.
I don't know if it's a direct result of sitting around wondering what you can do with your life, but I think this definitely was. Say, well, so many things we can do when we come out of this, just we rethink things a bit. Now we've all had a chance to sit down and reflect. That's what happened. And then, really just bluntly and sort of nakedly, Helen died. Helen died, which she was going to do because she wasn't well for a long time. And then I just started writing songs. And they just sort of poured out of me at that point. It seemed suddenly like the most natural thing in the world to do, to be honest. No, unquestionably, the album is connected to Helen and that time. That will be self-evident. And I feel now totally comfortable. It'd be up to other people to say whether they're any good or not. But I feel totally comfortable doing it and confident doing it, where I never had before. So that is entirely a new thing. Yeah. And enjoyable. Really enjoyable.
And very brave on a lot of levels, because you have gone through such a lot, you and your family, and it'd be very easy just to then sit back and you're doing brilliantly with your acting, and that could just carry on forever. But to throw yourself into something totally new is
Katie, you
quite
know what
brave.
I think the world needs? I think it needs another actor that thinks he's a musician. I think that's what the world needs right now. So I'm very, very happy to be fulfilling that role for everybody. I know it's the stupidest thing
No, it isn't at all.
In terms of potential critical response to it, because it's like, just the amount of people who must be sharpening their knives going, right, I'm going to really enjoy this.
Well, of course.
This guy's bringing out an album, come on. So, but the truth is, and this is why I was just saying, I think before we switched on, it sort of got big on me. The intention was only to have some fun with some, like you're doing.
Yes.
I think partly because the incredible collection of musicians I'm working with, people have been kind enough to say the songs are good, they stand up, and then suddenly you've got record labels taking an interest, and then it's like, oh Christ, really? Am I going to do that? Because that's a whole.
But why not?
That is a whole thing, am I really going to do that? And I am.
Yeah, because if you're enjoying
it actually turns out to be really good fun, and but then but of course you're more exposed once you make those decisions. But I'm now, fuck it.
Well, and also we're supposed to take ourselves out of our comfort zone. It's very good for us, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Challenge ourselves.
And what's
always,
the worst that can happen? Nothing.
Yeah.
So,
well, hold on a minute. What is the worst that can happen? That's really. I'm gonna have to think about that.
Well, I've listened. I've listened to you. I listened to your rendition of "Such a Night" with the Kansas Smitties, and
that was a very early iteration of what we were doing.
But but it's great, and you look as if you've been doing it all your life. And actually, a friend of mine, Keith Morrell, he's a brilliant singer, and he said when I was going to stand up and do some solos, and I was worried that my leg was going to go and all that kind of stuff, and he said, well, an audience listens with their eyes. So if you go up and stand like a pole and look tense, then they'll be tense and they'll be looking for the mistake. Whereas if you go and just enjoy it and blow through it, then everyone will just enjoy it with you.
That's just an acting note. That is a central thesis that we were all taught at drama school is the generosity in you sharing your story with the audience will win over any audience. So if you can affect that or even be that, you might be lucky enough just to actually be that person. You're on a winning thing. And never forget, and I'll just tie this in quickly, it's just a bit of sort of theatre, sort of, whatever, little bit of backstory, and it's just quite fun. The song that I was going to sing on Joe Stilgoe's Radio 2 jazz show was a song from Me and My Girl. I was going to do Me and My Girl. Me and My Girl was a musical I had seen as a youngster and had fallen in love with Bob Lindsay and Emma Thompson, who had done it so successfully in the West End. They went to Broadway, won all of this, that, and the other. Bob Lindsay, I was just a kid at the time, and I just remember thinking, you're the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. And he really couldn't dance. Because there were some tap numbers in it, and the producers, I just said, how did Bob do it? They said, Bob Lindsay's the greatest dancer in the world from the waist up. But that's it.
It's all right.
That told the story. All of this up here, the charm, the characterization, the selling of the song without being a trained singer, no trained dancing, just didn't matter. Just his ability to sell it, enjoy it, inhabit it, made him look like Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, all rolled into one. Boom. It was so, and anyway, I've never forgotten that.
Your charity work, because you've done loads with Helen. You raised 1.5 million to provide 40,000 meals to 40 hospitals. And I went to a dinner recently in aid of the charity Cure EB, where you and Helen were splashed all over the walls because you support that charity as well. Yeah. How do you choose because you must be inundated with requests and you do so much. But do you have any criteria for choosing?
Yes, that sort of moment when you are first in the public eye is when the charities really come, because obviously you are
Going to help
you
everyone
are
enormously.
peak value to them at
Yes.
that point. So I think I have 5 charities, and I think I just stopped it there. Prince's Trust, an ambassador of the Prince's Trust, which Helen and I really enjoyed. Curie Bee, patron of Curie Bee, helping find a cure for epidermolysis bullosa, a horrible skin condition. Kids, Seen and Heard, which is a little theatre charity in Camden, which I love, which is a brilliant charity, smaller. HVH Arts, new charity that Helen was patron of over the last 7 years, actually, and I've taken over in the last year, which is another brilliant arts charity running, giving kids an experience of the arts in Camden and Kentish Town area, so that, and Seen and Heard to North London. Yeah, what else? I did a bit with Christian Aid. Yeah, I'm just listing all my charities. What's the point of that? I don't want to overstate it. As an ambassador, you're needed for key moments. Absolutely not in touch with each of these charities daily, working out, the ins and outs of the sort of daily workings of a charity. I don't want to give you that impression. I'm not that nice. But I like to help when I can. All those charities do brilliant, brilliant things. Charities finding a cure is one thing, and charities providing an experience, a positive experience of life to increase someone's self-worth and confidence, and therefore expectations of life. I think that's particularly what I'm interested in.
I have 2 more things, and then I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
The first one is just something that I wanted to tell you, which is that I did see you about 10 years ago, and it was on a flight to Mauritius, and it was at the height of us watching Homeland. And I remember you walking onto and I would have been one of those people, but I did restrain myself from actually coming up because you had a 12-hour flight with me otherwise. But I did stare from one end of the plane to the next as you were coming past because, you're Brody. And my eyes flicked back up and I couldn't crane my neck anymore onto Helen. And she had completely busted me staring at her husband. And she gave me the most wonderfully wicked smile because I didn't recognize her at that moment. But then everything I watched that was any good, she was in, whether it was Peaky Blinders or even that Penny Dreadful. Anyway, so I was such a fan, but from that moment when I had really,
you're lucky you got the mischievous glint from Helen and not the other look.
It was a really
not the other look that would have cut you in half.
Definitely, it was the former. And the last thing that I wanted to say was because my intel tells me that you're very involved in your children's lives. You're a very hands-on father. And the same intel posed a question, which is whether, with hindsight, last season, when you were asked to step in as team coach and manager for the Belsize Park under-14 side upon one occasion, how well you felt you read your market when, in an attempt to fire up your players, you dispensed with any of the normal nonsense about tactics or formation in your team talk and instead sent them out onto the pitch with the words of the St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V, Act 4, Scene 3, still ringing in their ears.
I know where that's come from.
So it's because of Rick that I'm talking to you today, but that was the question. So, what was the speech? I haven't looked up the speech yet.
Yes. So I suppose, what's it's, and made this story, oh God, no, I'm going to forget. This story made a good man teach his son, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he that serves with me today shall be my brother. It's Henry V pre-Agincourt. And I decided to recite that to the boys who went out and lost. So
maybe they lost while daring greatly.
I don't think it worked, which I think might be Rick's point. Yes, just maybe it should have been, ice creams for the winners. and that would have done it.
No, well, lovely Rick Saunders.
No, I should say about Rick, none of your listeners won't mean anything to your listeners apart from your friends. Rick is the most efficient, most graceful linesman in the Watford Friendly League.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he attacks his duties as linesman with a professional efficiency not seen before in the North London suburbs, in the Watford, Barnet and Enfield environ.
Okay.
He's quite incredible. To see him running along the line, slightly hunched, stooped, with the flag absolutely professionally pointed down along the line until he whips it up and raises it for an offside is a sight to behold. Yeah, it's very good. He's very good at it. It's very funny.
Oh, well, he's a lovely man. Damien, thank you for this time. That's a lot more than I
Thank
said
you.
it was going to be.
Thank
And
you.
good luck with your music, with your acting, with your family. 10 days after this conversation, I went to the Tabernacle to see Damien perform with his band. He and they were fantastic. His songs more than stood up. They had us all dancing. I'll alert you via social media when he starts releasing his music. You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to Matthew Passy and all at the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.